On Cinemassacre, I don't think I've given enough attention to Disney animated films. I guess I always felt it was too obvious, being that these films were such a big part of our childhoods. They're burned into our memories so much that I think of them as second nature. We all watched them as kids, they've been passed down the generations, and the animation ages so well that you can't tell when exactly they were made. As a kid, I would have never guessed that Snow White was made in the 30s. So let's talk about some memorable Disney moments and my personal top 5 favorite Disney animated films. But first, a word from this video's sponsor. Have you ever had trouble finding the right pair of shoes? Well, search no more, because Vessi sneakers are for you. With the Magic Layer, also known as our patented Dymatex, they are 100% waterproof and feature a breathable knit that keep your feet warm in the winter and cool in the summer, so they're perfect all year round. And when they say waterproof, they're not kidding. To test them out, I put a tissue in the sneaker and submerged my foot in water. Other sneakers would just drench your foot, making you wish you bought an extra pair. But with Vessi brand, a little water won't ruin your day. Just look at that, dry as a bone. Whether I'm going for a hike or running errands and a storm comes out of nowhere, I know that my feet will stay dry. They're really comfortable and lightweight too. I especially appreciate the support that the soles supply. It makes you feel like you're walking on clouds. Plus, I love the look of them. Inside or outside, they've quickly become my go-to shoes by the door. Get your own pair of Vessis by going to the link in the description and using my code to get $25 off your order. As a kid, Disney animated films had the reputation of being like the gold standard of cartoons. Characters were rendered as realistic-looking people, they showed genuine emotions on their faces, they cried, they laughed, they sang, even talking animals seemed believable. Disney adapted these timeless tales and created a world of imagination where anything could happen, and populated these worlds with characters you love and feel for, and characters you love to hate. Nowadays, you have access to every Disney film thanks to Disney+, but it was never like that before. Growing up, I remember whenever a Disney movie would come out on VHS, there'd be a commercial that says, "Get it now before it goes back into the vault." That gave them sort of an elusive, mystical quality. The VHS tapes themselves came in these large clamshell cases. They were like a treasure to behold, and they looked so magnificent and regal compared to all those other ordinary VHS tapes on the shelf. I remember as a kid, whenever watching one of these movies, it was like a special occasion. I think it was usually video rentals and sometimes on TV. I didn't own many, but the funny thing is, with Disney Plus and children of my own, I've seen Disney films more often now than ever before. Want to see The Jungle Book? Click. There it is. So when it comes to picking out my favorite Disney animated features, it's really tough because there's so many moments that made an impression on me as a kid. For example, in Dumbo, there's a scene where Dumbo gets drunk, and yes, literally he drinks alcohol, which somehow causes him to hallucinate a parade of pink elephants. This is one of the weirdest, trippiest scenes ever put to animation. I never forgot this, especially the part where 6 marching elephants of all different colors morph together and become a body made up of heads, and then all those heads start coming toward the screen. Ugh, creepy. I could go on and on about all the terrifying moments that were really messed up for kids to watch. Like in Pinocchio, there's a scene that involves drinking and smoking, and a kid that turns into a donkey, a literal jackass. But there's something about the transformation that freaked me out as a kid. The way he grabs Pinocchio as his hands are turning into hooves. He's screaming in desperation, "You gotta help me, pal!" But of course, there's nothing Pinocchio can do to help. Something about that really bothered me. Then, of course, there's the classic example, Bambi's mother being killed. Everyone knows that one. These moments could all be a subject for another day. The funny thing, the harrowing moment that stuck with me the most was the cat falling out the window in Cinderella. It seems nobody talks about that one. It didn't make me sad or traumatize me or whatever. It just made me angry that they had the nerve to kill a cat. I mean, sure, you could say the cat survived the fall, but Do you ever see the cat again after that? No. The cat plummets to its death! But I guess when you have an evil cat named Lucifer, that's what happens. In the 90s, Disney films were my introduction to many great actors. The first time I heard Gilbert Gottfried's voice was in Aladdin. Or maybe it was Problem Child, I forget. But the voice fit the character Iago so perfectly, I always just thought that's the way birds would talk. I didn't realize he was a stand-up comedian till afterwards, and when I first heard Iago swear, that blew my mind. And in that same movie was Robin Williams as the genie. I loved that voice and personality so much, and afterwards I saw Mrs. Doubtfire and realized how insanely versatile he was. And then there was James Earl Jones as Mufasa in Lion King. Wow, what a fantastic voice. At that point I already knew Darth Vader, but after The Lion King, he was permanently cemented as the voice of my childhood. Then there's, of course, all the great music. Disney movies are often remembered for their songs, and if that were a factor, The Lion King has a soundtrack of battleship proportions. You get Elton John, and it's instant gold. The amount of singles that came out of that one movie is just simply nuts. So in picking favorites, there's many aspects worth considering, but I want to go with what my favorite overall Disney films are. It's all about the story, the characters, how it makes me feel, and how it challenges me to explain what it is I'm feeling. Also, Disney animation is kind of a broad category. Do we count Who Framed Roger Rabbit? That would be one of my favorites for sure, but it's a mix of live action and animation. How about Nightmare Before Christmas? That's one of my favorite films of all time, but it's stop motion. I'm thinking more traditional animation. It could still have CG in it as long as 99% of the film is traditionally drawn. But nothing full CG like Wreck-It Ralph, even though I love Wreck-It Ralph. But if I'm going to narrow down my top 5 favorites, it's also going to have to be something that made a big impression on me as a kid. So for me, my personal cutoff would be The Lion King. That's when I stopped seeing Disney films on a regular basis. By that point, I was too cool for school, I guess. But if I were to pick a favorite modern one with traditional animation, I would say The Princess and the Frog. That's definitely a movie that brought me back. Charming story, incredible animation, everything I remember about the classics. So let's get on with the list. Here's my top 5 favorite theatrical, traditionally animated Disney feature-length films. Number 5, Sleeping Beauty. I think the reason this has to make my top 5 is because it has, in my opinion, the best villain, Maleficent. Because first of all, you take just one look at her and she's clearly a villain. I mean, she's the archetype. And in her final form turns into a giant dragon. Like, okay, you can't beat that. Nothing is more classic than a dragon as the final boss. But her evil plans are not exactly the most efficient. She wants revenge for not being invited to the christening of the baby princess Aurora, so she places a curse that she'll die when she's 16 by pricking her finger on a spinning wheel, the type for weaving yarn. So if she wanted to kill the princess, why couldn't she just kill her right there? But hey, it's a fairy tale. And another big reason why I love this one so much is the supporting characters, the 3 fairies specifically, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. They're in charge of keeping the princess safe, and in their secluded cottage home, they basically raise her. They're like the 3 parental figures, kind of like Full House, but with magical fairies. The scene that sticks out to me the most is when they're trying to make a dress and cake for Aurora's birthday, but they vowed not to use magic as that would attract Maleficent's troops. So they tried their best to make this dress and cake, but it's a complete disaster. They're like the 3 Stooges, but magical fairies. So overall, it's not a perfect Disney movie. The prince and princess are kind of typical, but the supporting characters fill it in with so many memorable, charming moments. Number 4, Beauty and the Beast. On my list, I think this is objectively the best told story. It does a great job with the time-tested 3-act structure, takes you on an emotional ride. The sad moments, the feel-good moments, it's all there. Belle is one of the most likable protagonists. She's optimistic and full of curiosity and passion. She has her interests, she likes reading books, and is kind of different from the rest of the townspeople. When her father's trapped in the Beast's castle, she offers to take his place, and despite how cruel the Beast is at first, she still gives him the benefit of the doubt. She sticks up for herself, she puts him in his place, and helps him to become better. I love how when you first meet the Beast, he's an awful monster and is straight up scary, but then you gradually start to see more humanity in him and he changes. The scenes of Belle bonding with him and seeing the kindness and understanding between two very different people is very heartwarming. And of course, who could forget all the great characters of the castle that have all been turned into furniture, teapots, and candles. And Gaston is such a unique villain because his physical appearance is very much like that of a typical hero. When you first see him, he looks like he's going to be the good guy, but instead he's a narcissist who thinks he's entitled to marry Belle, and as the movie goes on, he becomes worse. So it's a very interesting twist on the hero-villain archetypes. And of course, there's the cliche of the monster and the girl. It's King Kong, it's Creature from the Black Lagoon. But here it's done as a genuine, loving relationship that takes shape. Number 3, Alice in Wonderland, based on the Lewis Carroll story. This film is made up of a series of surreal, dreamlike encounters as Alice moves through one crazy scene to the next. It's very episodic in nature and is certainly not the most cohesive in narrative structure, but this one stuck with me because it's so weird and off the wall. I'll always remember the caterpillar puffing out all those shapes in the smoke, Tweedledee and Tweedledum bouncing around, the wild tea party with the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, and the final chapter with the Queen of Hearts. I always loved the animation on all those card characters marching around in spectacular patterns. But the scenes I loved best was whenever the Cheshire Cat appeared. There's something about his voice that is so calming and eccentric. The character, Sterling Holloway, was in tons of other films, like tons. He was Winnie the Pooh, he was the snake Kaa in Jungle Book, and he was in the Twilight Zone episode What's in the Box. But with the Cheshire Cat, that goofy face has become permanently embedded in my brain. There's something soothing and creepy about that smile, and the way it sticks around when he enters or exits a scene. You know, to this day, whenever I see a crescent moon, especially when it's next to the tree branches, I always think of the Cheshire Cat. But Alice is, of course, the character who grounds it all, our only connection with reality. And she's very relatable to me, being bored with her schoolwork, and having an endless imagination and escaping into her own dreams. Though she's also eating mushrooms and drinking from a bottle to change her size. This could be compared to ingesting drugs and alcohol to change one's state of mind, but she's never happy with the state she's in and always changing it up. I always found the scene disturbing when she's lost in the woods, growing tired of all the nonsensical things she's witnessing, to the point where she's homesick and broken down crying. It's the classic moral that we've also learned from Dorothy. There's no place like home. Number 2, Ichabod and Mr. Toad. So this one's tricky because it's 2 short films combined into a feature. That's how it was originally released, but since then there's been some television and home video versions that split them in 2. Later, the DVD and Disney Plus joined them back together. But I grew up on the Ichabod section, and since I've always thought of that as a short film, I never thought to include it. But technically, it is part of a feature, so it has to make the list. The Mr. Toad half is still very good, based on The Wind in the Willows, but it's only the Ichabod half that makes it one of my favorites. Of course, it's based on The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which is one of my favorite classic horror tales, probably because of this particular movie. Bing Crosby narrates it, and he has a very relaxing quality to his voice. He tells it like a spooky campfire tale, but also keeps it fun and jolly. The first half of it is more like a comedy, with Ichabod and Brom Bones competing over Katrina like a couple of fools, which is very much like Popeye and Bluto competing over olive oil. One of them will try to do something nice for her, while the other one throws him off track, and they keep going back and forth. It's very slapstick and very humorous, which is what I like about it. Also, the way Ichabod is depicted is very funny, with him always being obsessed with food, shoving whole turkeys into his mouth and consuming everything in sight, even though he's skinny as a toothpick, a walking contradiction. But the best part is when Brom Bones tells him the story of the Headless Horseman and gets him all creeped out. That song and dance, complete with shadows and jack-o'-lanterns and black cats, perfectly sets up the Halloween mood. And it only gets better when Ichabod is on his way home through the woods at night. That is the epitome of scary but innocent animation. It's full of brilliant little details, like when the cloud passes in front of the moon, it looks like a hand. As a kid, I thought that was amazing. The way this scene is paced is just absolutely perfect. I love the way Ichabod keeps running into things that he thinks are ghosts, but they turn out to be nothing more than just a couple of fireflies in front of a tree. And just when he thinks everything's all good, the Headless Horseman actually shows up in full glory. Like all of a sudden, it gets real. And what follows is probably one of the best spooky slapstick chase scenes ever in a Disney film. It's a tradition that I must watch this every October in time for Halloween. And my number one favorite Disney animated feature, The Sword in the Stone. Like I said, these are just my personal favorites. I don't know if I could say Sword in the Stone is ultimately the best Disney film, since usually when you think Disney animated feature, it's always got to have a princess of some kind, maybe an evil curse, but this one doesn't really have all the tropes. It's also a bit episodic. It's one set piece after another, and there isn't even a prominent villain until they meet Madame Mim, who is isolated into only one scene near the end. The main character is a young boy, the future King Arthur. He lives with his foster father and foster brother, who treat him very poorly, much like in Cinderella. He's picked on a lot. He's young, he's humble, he's scrawny and unassuming. Nobody thinks of him very highly, except for the wizard Merlin, who becomes his mentor. This classic tale, the dynamic between the old mentor and young student, is the classic relationship repeated in future stories like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings with Gandalf and Frodo, and George Lucas's Star Wars with Obi-Wan and Luke. The Merlin character here is wise and prophetic, but he's also a bit absent-minded and clumsy, engaging in slapstick scenarios involving floating teapots, brooms, or simply getting his beard stuck in a door. I always got a good laugh out of this character, but even more, his sidekick, the owl Archimedes, who is just as agitated as he is wise. I love Archimedes. Still to this day, I laugh at how pompous and lazy and short-tempered he is. The only joy he gets is out of Merlin's failures. Merlin tries to demonstrate a flying model plane, only to have it get caught in his beard. He should really just trim that beard. The plane plummets down into the moat below, and Archimedes laughs for like a whole minute. The way he hoots and squawks when he laughs, bird-like, yet also very much the way people do sometimes, and then gasps to catch his breath, and then laughs some more, that is gold. Laughing is contagious, and with an animated owl, even more so. So there's 3 magical scenes where Merlin transforms Arthur into a fish, a squirrel, and a bird. These 3 segments are the main adventures in the movie. It keeps the variety and keeps it fresh. Even though these scenes aren't really related to much else, they're immensely entertaining. The final encounter is the wizard duel, Merlin versus Madame Mim. I always loved this concept where they fight each other by changing into various animals. That level of imagination always stuck with me as a kid. But the thing about this movie that resonates with me the most is the role that destiny plays in the story. None of the other characters expect Arthur to amount to anything, but it turns out he's the only one who can pull the legendary sword from the stone, making him the rightful heir to the throne. They tried to shortchange him and box him in a corner, but quite unintentionally, he showed them and put them all in their place. It's the underdog story. It's the heroes rising. It's the master sword. It's Zelda. It's the child growing up to pursue his or her destiny and aspirations. That's the soul and magic, what makes it my favorite Disney film.